A single golden tear traced the weary face of Brother Codicir Alast, its lustrous trail illuminating the cracked ceramite of his ancient armor. He knelt in the heart of the crimson-lit chapel aboard the Blood Angel's strike cruiser in devotion's wake, his war helm placed gently on the polished floor. Around him lay the icons of Sanguinus, the angelic father of the Blood Angels, each depiction capturing the prime arc's radiance, sorrow, and sacrifice. Flickering candles cast dancing shadows upon stained glass windows, their vibrant artistry frozen in scenes of the Great Crusade and the heresy that followed. With trembling gloved fingertips, Alast traced the outline of Sanguinius's sweeping pinions on a small golden plaque. Something tremored in the warp. A whisper touched the psychic boundaries of his mind, urging him to rise. He stood slowly, rotating mechanical joints stiff from hours of prayer. His eyes closed behind the smooth ridges of his bionic ocular implant, forging a telepathic link with the purified mental wards scattered throughout the ship. Alast's breath caught in his throat as he sensed a tremor rippling across real space. A ripple pregnant with possibility and dread. Without a moment's hesitation, he strode from the chapel, the carved doors parting with solemn hush. Servitors in gilded robes bowed mechanically, and scarlet-clad blood angels stepped aside to let the codicir pass. There was a sense of urgency in the vessel's corridors, an electric tension that set every nerve on edge. Far beyond the confines of In Devotion's wake, the Imperium reeled beneath the newly created Great Rift. Worlds vanished behind curtains of roiling warp storms, astropathic messages arrived broken and incomplete, and demonic incursions erupted wherever the barriers between realities grew thin. At the center of this cosmic tumult, Robot Guilliman, prime arc of the Ultramarines, newly awakened and burdened with the title of Lord Commander, fought to hold the Imperium together. Though the Blood Angels had joined him in the Indomitus Crusade, something in Alast's vision demanded a new course, a divergence that placed them on a path outside the standard battle lines. If his reading of the warp's fluttering was correct, it promised either salvation or a heartbreak deeper than any they had known since the Siege of Terra. In the command deck, Captain Lucan Orad of the Fifth Company stood, his posture rigid. At the heart of the chamber, shimmering hololiths displayed the subsectors flayed open by the Great Rift. Dante's orders had sent the Fifth on a mission to reinforce a faltering system on the outskirts of Segmentum Solar, but now Alast's urgent summons might change everything. Lucan was famed for his stoic resolve, yet tension etched his features as he regarded the codicir with eyes that burned with a silent question. In measured tones, Alast delivered the message. There had been a psychic spike emanating from the warp. A wave, faint but pure, that shone with the brilliance of a soul that should have been long lost. Alast could not interpret the vision perfectly. Warp phenomena were seldom precise. It might be a trap, a craft of demons weaving illusions to snare the Blood Angels' hearts. Or it might be a promise of something they had yearned for since that fateful day upon the vengeful spirit. It was more than any loyal son of Sanguinius could bear to disregard. Lucan inhaled slowly before giving the order to alter course. Regardless of risk, they would seek the source of that ghostly call. If there was even a slight chance. Across space and war-torn systems, the strike cruiser veered away from the main warp corridor that led to their intended reinforcement zone. Like a solitary ember cast into the blackness, In Devotion's wake plunged deeper into the uncharted edges near the Eye of Terror. Gravatic sensors spiked unpredictably as warp storms battered their Geller fields, sending shuddering pulses through the ship's frame. Each passing hour brought flickers of plasmic light scarring the vessel's shields, and the astropaths continuously reported anomalies. The entire journey felt like wading through the threshold of nightmares, where demonic laughter might punctuate the next second. And yet they pressed on, hearts aflame with a fragile hope. Meanwhile, the Imperium at large wrestled with tragedy and triumph in equal measure. Robot Guilliman steeled himself upon the bridge of the Macrage's honor, waging a desperate campaign to maintain supply lines for the Indomitus Crusade. The newly minted Primaris Marines stood tall among the ranks, forging onward with unwavering discipline. But there was always a looming darkness, a sense that all was on the brink of collapse without relentless vigilance. Gilliman was forced to contend not only with external threats but with the Imperium's own labyrinthine bureaucracy, an entity mutated beyond recognition since his internment. Yet he persevered. His father's Imperium needed saving, and he alone could guide it. In the midst of these macrocosmic efforts, a faint message reached Gilliman's ears through the labyrinth of astropathic channels. The Blood Angels had deviated from their assigned route without formal explanation. Under normal circumstances, such an unapproved maneuver might warrant censure. But Gilliman knew Dante, the chapter master of the Blood Angels, to be as steadfast as he was noble. If this deviation was orchestrated, it would not be in betrayal. Something had called them away. He considered dispatching a message to recall them, but the warp storms had grown more furious by the day, and secure channels were few. Still, a thread of curiosity tugged at him, for the Blood Angels had long been known for extraordinary feats and equally extraordinary tragedy. They had lost their father, Sanguinus, to the arch-traitor Horus in the final hours of the heresy, a wound that never truly healed. If rumor and warp whispers could be believed, something sensational was taking shape. Gilliman, weighed by duty, pressed the notion aside. He had entire war zones to coordinate, entire segmenti to rally. The Emperor's light demanded his presence, even as a small kernel of hope whispered that perhaps, just perhaps, some new salvation was stirring. Within, in devotion's wake, Alast's dreams deepened in both intensity and coherence. He saw fleeting visions of a radiant being bound in a tomb of golden light, wings spread in stasis, tears shimmering in a cosmic darkness. He caught glimpses of a location wreathed in black storms, the ground soaked by millennia of warp energies, half real and half nightmare. Every time, the golden figure grew closer until a single word echoed in the Codicier's mind. Imperator, the glorious son of the Emperor, calling out. The rumble of blood thundered in Alast's ears. He woke from these trances with sweat beading his brow. The handful of librarians aboard the vessel assisted with the scrying. Each time, they glimpsed more. A lonely shrine world battered by the Great Rift, its cathedrals half-sunken into fathomless lakes of swirling storm clouds. The planet's name was lost from all but the oldest imperial records. But at the edge of the dataslate archives, a match was found for ancient chart references. The planet had once been called Lyssa Secundus, a minor pilgrimage site dedicated to one of the lesser imperial saints. Long rumored to be home to relics of the Sanguinian line, it had fallen silent centuries ago. Perhaps overshadowed, perhaps overrun. Coordinates set, the strike cruiser changed course for Lyssa Secundus. Hours turned to days as the warp roiled around them, and every second the Geller fields moaned under the pressure of demonic forms that lurked just beyond sight. The spiritual shrines of the Blood Angels were invoked daily, psalms to the Emperor, to the memory of Sanguinius, and to the unity of their gene line. The tension building among the Astartes was almost palpable. No one voiced it openly, but they all felt a sense of destiny approaching. Even the ordinarily stoic tech marines offered fervent benedictions to the war spirits of their machines. Perhaps it was an illusion, an elaborate snare from the dark powers seeking to exploit the chapter's greatest sorrow. Still, duty and devotion propelled them forward. They had no choice. The transition to real space near Lyssa Secundus came with violent turbulence. The warp spat them out like an unwanted morsel, and the strike cruiser's engines flared as the vessel lurched uncontrollably. On the planet below, swirling violet clouds and bursts of warp lightning defied the laws of nature. The once beautiful structures of the planet, seen in ancient records, appeared as contorted spires carved by centuries of exposure to a warp storm. The Auspex readings were scrambled, but faint signals suggested that something was indeed emanating from one of the largest cathedral complexes. Captain Lucan Orad gave the order for an immediate reconnaissance. Thunderhawks descended through the chaotic atmosphere. The greenish-black skies boiled as if alive, streams of warp-laced wind buffeting the craft. For a moment, it seemed as though the planet itself resisted their arrival, slamming their hulls with unstoppable fury. Yet the Thunderhawks were forged by the best artisans of the Imperium, and the skill of the Blood Angels' pilots won out against the violent storm. With a shrieking of thrusters, the craft touched down upon a plateau of cracked marble. The remains of once grand columns and statues lay strewn across the ground, battered beyond recognition. The place felt saturated with energies far older than the Imperium's presence, an undercurrent of malice that twisted the air. Alast and a squad of veteran brothers stepped onto the surface, their boots grinding shards of broken mosaic underfoot. Each marine's sensorium was alive with caution, scanning in all directions for any sign of hostiles, whether demonic, Xenos, or human renegade. But the environment around them was eerily quiet, save for the howling wind. Crimson ceramite shimmered with refracted lightning, creating an illusion of bloody halos around each warrior. With measured steps, they advanced toward the silhouette of the central cathedral, a structure that still stood in the chaos as though safeguarded by some intangible barrier. The cathedral doors, wrought from ancient iron and hammered into reliefs of imperial saints, were corroded and half open. Despite centuries of disuse, a faint glow danced beyond the threshold. The Astartes proceeded inward, weapons at the ready. Their every footstep echoed off vaulted ceilings that soared hundreds of meters above, where frescoes, now blackened by soot and decay, once depicted heroic figures. Arcs of warp lightning raced across the intricately carved pillars. Alast felt the psychic presence intensify, as if some boundary between realms was being held open by stubborn will alone. They found the source of the glow at the heart of a grand reliquary chamber. Pulsing lines of warp energy fed a bubble of golden light that hovered in the center, wreathed in swirling motes like embers caught in a cosmic wind. Debris, splintered icons, half-melted candelabras, shattered skulls, circled around the sphere in a slow orbit. And at the core of that radiance stood a figure. Captain Orad exhaled in astonishment through his helm's vox, not daring to articulate the name forming in every mind present. For if they believed their eyes, this was the form of Sanguinius himself, suspended in a pillar of shimmering luminescence. Alast advanced, his psychic senses straining to detect illusions or traps. He felt no demonic corruption, no stench of Tsench's manipulations nor Korn's mindless fury. The signature felt somehow pure, if such a thing could exist in this swirling maelstrom. Closer he crept, noticing the silent features on the face of the figure. The same noble aspect portrayed in 1,000 statues, the same sorrowful grace known in the hearts of every blood angel. Yet this visage was not a simple carving of marble or a cunning hollow projection. It breathed faintly but unmistakably. Half-lidded eyes, seemingly lost in a dream, flickered beneath regal brows. The figure's wings were furled, their once feathered pinions a shimmering extension of living biology. Alast's hearts hammered in unison with a crescendo of disbelief, awe, and a mounting sense of destiny. Then, a resonance pulsed through the chamber. The orb of golden light receded fraction by fraction, and the swirling debris clattered to the floor. A gentle quake rippled outward, forcing the assembled Marines to brace themselves. Their sensors went haywire for a moment, readings lost to static. Slowly, the luminous shell that encased the figure began to evaporate like morning mist under a rising sun. Silence, complete and profound, enveloped the cathedral. In that hush, Sanguinius, angelic prime arc of the blood angels, sank to his knees. His wings trembled, and his gaze remained unfocused, as though he were halfway between worlds. Alast, the first to break from his stunned reverie, hurried to the side of the kneeling figure, disbelief warring with paternal devotion. He fell to his own knees, letting his bolter clatter to the floor. Leaning closer, he saw the swirling patterns of golden runes dancing across the prime arc's bare chest, faint but still flickering with warp residue. He looked into the pale face of the father of his gene line and suppressed the fear that this was some vile trick. A heartbeat later, Sanguinius's eyes opened. Ancient, sorrow-laced irises, the color of a dawn sky, regarded Alast. A trace of recognition sparked there, as though the newly revived prime arc could see not just the present but all the threads that bound them across time. In that moment, Alast heard a voice within his thoughts, a gentle yet firm presence. "My son, where am I?" The codicil could scarcely speak, tears streaming freely. "Father," he managed at last, "you are home, among your sons." With trembling hands, he supported Sanguinius as the prime arc rose unsteadily, wings outstretching partially before folding back. Other blood angels stood silent, their hearts filled with reverence as they bore witness to the impossible. Word spread swiftly once they returned to the strike cruiser. Not even the most stoic Astartes could maintain discipline when confronted by the presence of their gene father, alive against all logic. Some dropped to their knees in worship, others offered tearful praises. Every soul in the chapter had grown up venerating the legend of Sanguinius, his humility, courage, and unwavering devotion to the emperor. Now that legend walked among them. Even so, confusion and uncertainty warred with exultation. How had this miracle occurred? Why here, amidst a warp storm on a forgotten shrine world? And what would it mean for the future of the Blood Angels, a chapter that had struggled for 10,000 years with the twin curses of the Black Rage and the Red Thirst? Sanguinius himself was disoriented, partial memories colliding with present reality. He recalled echoes of a colossal duel against Horus, the heartbreak of betrayal, and then brilliant agony. After that, an expansive nothingness, a near-eternal drift in the Emperor's light. There was a sense of having heard the Emperor's voice call him back, though he could not fully recall the words. Now everything was changed. The Imperium was a battered colossus lurching from crisis to crisis. The Great Crusade's optimism had long since faded into the grim determination of survival. In the days that followed, the Prime Arc wandered the corridors of In Devotion's wake, silent. His presence alone seemed to fortify the chapter, restoring vigor to the weary. Yet, he sensed the question in every pair of eyes. What now? Captain Orad eventually prostrated himself before the angelic Prime Arc, explaining that they must contact Lord Commander Guilliman. Sanguinius started at that name. Guilliman lived? Relief and joy flickered across his features. Of all his brothers, Guilliman had been a steadfast ally, a paragon of order and strategy. The thought that Robot also stood reborn in this dark age gave Sanguinius hope that the Imperium might still be mended. Resolute, the Prime Arc commanded the Blood Angels to set course for Makridge, Guilliman's seat of power. The warp storms yet raged, but he would see this done. He could not imagine how Guilliman must have borne the weight of 10 millennia alone. Sanguinius vowed to stand by him once more. Thus began a labyrinthine journey fraught with peril. Warp routes were blocked or racked by storms. The Crusade fleets had scattered across numerous warfronts, connected by only the most tenuous channels. But the combined skill of the Blood Angels navigators and the intangible aura of Sanguinius worked in tandem. Whenever the vessel skirted the edge of a storm too large to circumvent, the Prime Arc would stand upon the strategium deck, gazing into the swirling madness beyond the Geller field. He would shut his eyes, muster a deep, intrinsic power, and somehow the storms would part. Even the most jaded crew members fell to devout prayer at the display of such mastery. Every time, Sanguinius emerged visibly drained. But each time, they succeeded in forging an improbable path forward. Meanwhile, Guilliman remained embroiled in the complexities of the Indomitus Crusade. From the fortress monastery of Hera in Ultramar, he coordinated dozens of warfronts across the segmentum. Reports arrived from the fringes of known space. Rebellious warlords rising on quarantined worlds, demonic infestations turning once loyal planets into charnel houses, splinter fleets of Tyranids testing the Imperium's renewed defenses. Amid all this chaos, communications from the Blood Angels had grown silent. Guilliman felt a pang of concern, but he could not dispatch reinforcements while pinned down by the strategic demands of a new Orc incursion in the eastern fringe. Nonetheless, he ordered his best astropathic choirs to reach out. Too often, their transmissions vanished into a howling warp tide. It was nearly a month later when a priority channel broke open, delivering a scrambled message. The Blood Angels were inbound, citing a matter of utmost import. The code signifiers on the communication indicated it was from High Command of the chapter. A single word preceded the rest of the transmission: Resurrection. Confused and wary, Gilliman allowed himself a moment of curiosity. The Blood Angels had always revered their lost father above all, mourning him more than any other chapter mourned their own prime arc. But resurrection? Couldn't be. The Emperor himself lay immobile, entombed upon the golden throne, and none had dared speak of resurrecting him. So who or what had returned among the sons of Sanguinius? The day came when a single-strike cruiser, bearing the markings of the Blood Angels, translated from the warp near Makridge. The planet's orbital defenses immediately recognized the friend or foe transponder. But the approach was cautious. Gilliman himself descended to the fortress landing zone, wishing to greet Commander Dante if he were aboard. At his side stood Calgar, the chapter master of the Ultramarines, and a retinue of honor guard. Lining the walkway were rows of Primaris Marines, formed in perfect discipline. Even in times of crisis, the sight of Makridge's proud defenses stood as a testament to Gilliman's organizational genius. The Thunderhawk doors hissed open. At first, Gilliman saw only Captain Lucan Orad stepping forward, flanked by a retinue of Blood Angels veterans in ornate armor. Their red plate glowed in the midday sun, each warrior's posture radiating an energy beyond formal discipline. Then, from the interior gloom, a shape emerged, tall and ethereal, golden hair framing high cheekbones, wings folded majestically behind. Gilliman's hearts, one enhanced by the gene forging of the Emperor, the other carved from centuries of war, seized in his chest. He recognized that face. In an instant, time seemed to loop back 10 millennia to the days of the Great Crusade, a swirl of memories. Sanguinius smiling upon Baal's desert plains, Sanguinius charging with blade held high against the monstrous beasts of the outer reaches, Sanguinius stepping bravely into the teleporter to face Horus alone. The vision was no phantom. Sanguinius halted at the foot of the ramp, and his gaze fell upon Gilliman. The Lord Commander froze, mind reeling, logic protesting that this must be a trick. Yet every sense told him otherwise. The raw psychic aura Sanguinius radiated was a beacon in the warp, pure and uncorrupted. Trembling, Gilliman stepped forward. Neither prime arc spoke for a moment. Then, in a gesture echoing across the millennia, they embraced like brothers long separated by cosmic distances. Gasps and awe rippled through the assembled Astartes. Even the Ultramarine Honor Guard, typically unshakable, bowed their heads in reverence. It was a moment none had dared dream of, yet here it was, carved into reality. Difficult questions demanded answers. In the halls of Makridge's Grand Strategium, Gilliman studied Sanguinius's form, trying to reconcile the sight with the galaxy's logic. Over hours of discussion, they shared what each had experienced. Gilliman recounted the ages of darkness, the fall of Cadia, the birth of the Great Rift, and his own resurrection through the artifice of Belisarius' call, aided by the Eldar of Rain's necromantic powers. In turn, Sanguinius described hazy recollections of a timeless void and glimpses of the Emperor's presence. Something had drawn him back, some final act of paternal mercy or cosmic alignment that had made his return possible, anchored by a hidden relic upon Lyssa Secundus. The details remained murky. The prime arc of the Blood Angels was no warp sorcerer. He couldn't fully explain how these events had transpired. Debate erupted among Gilliman's advisors. Some argued that this phenomenon was too miraculous and unverified. Could chaos forces be staging the ultimate infiltration? Yet each of Gilliman's librarians, each of his most trusted psychers, confirmed that Sanguinius's spirit was untainted. Witnessing the tangible effect of his presence upon the Blood Angels, where their gene flaws seemed momentarily stilled, added powerful evidence. Gilliman, though cautious, could not deny the truth that stood before him. With a heavy heart, he remembered how much Sanguinius had given. If the Emperor himself had willed Sanguinius's return, who was Gilliman to question it? In the following days, Makridge erupted in celebration. Word spread throughout the system and, via secure astropathic transmissions across the galaxy. Whole populations bowed in worship at the rumor that the great angel walked again among the living. The ecclesiarchy reeled, frantically adjusting its dogma to accommodate the prime arc's reemergence. Pilgrims began flocking to the edges of Ultramar, desperate for a glimpse of the angelic figure they had only read about in battered tomes. Guilliman recognized the potential of Sanguinius's return to bolster morale in these desperate times. Yet he also worried about how to integrate the presence of another living prime arc into a bureaucracy that had grown rigid and archaic. The specter of worship, almost at the level of the emperor himself, hovered around Sanguinius in ways that made Guilliman uneasy. For his part, Sanguinius found himself both elated and burdened. He had longed to see the Imperium he helped build endure. He was stunned to find that, despite everything, it still stood, though battered and compromised. He marveled at the new breed of Astartes, the Primaris, who towered even over the firstborn. Yet he also sensed the heartbreak and fear in so many corners of this decaying empire of humanity. The knowledge that the emperor had lain silent upon the golden throne for 10,000 years weighed heavily on him, reviving the grief of his father's final silent farewell so long ago. Despite the swirl of events, the new union between Sanguinius and Guilliman did not remain idle. The Imperium was threatened on countless fronts. Now more than ever, the combined might of two prime arcs was needed to stabilize sectors besieged by chaos. After a series of high-level councils, they decided upon a course of action. A grand crusade to strike back at the festering chaos footholds in the Segmentum Solar, then push outward to restore contact with lost sectors. The presence of Sanguinius offered a new dimension of hope. Guilliman had the authority and strategic brilliance, while Sanguinius provided an undeniable symbol that rallied entire systems. The first target was a cluster of worlds near the newly formed warp storms that had isolated them for decades. Intelligence indicated that a chaos warband known as the Claws of Nurgle had turned the region into a plague-ridden domain. The precarious warp routes demanded caution, but Sanguinius volunteered to spearhead the assault with a combined force of Blood Angels and select Ultramarines elements. Though Guilliman insisted on the utmost caution, he recognized that Sanguinius's personal leadership could turn the tide swiftly. The Great Angel's presence alone would be enough to galvanize any Imperial defenders still holding out. When the fleets arrived in system, they found the planets choked in disease and ruin. Pale green clouds hung over once thriving hives, and orbital scans revealed massive plague engines constructing monstrous altars of rot. The stench of corruption permeated even vacuum-sealed compartments. Yet when Sanguinius's strike force made planetfall, the response from remaining loyalist defenders was electric. Civilians, starved and diseased, emerged from cramped shelters and collapsed in adoration at the sight of the radiant prime arc. Regiments of bedraggled PDF, their morale crushed by years of plague horror, rallied with renewed determination. Even pockets of once doubtful planetary governors fervently pledged fealty, tears streaming as they bowed before him. Leading from the front, Sanguinius soared into the thick of battle. His wings carried him above twisted spires of plague-ridden rock, and with each sweep, he struck down heretic champions, their runic armor splitting under the unstoppable force of his blade. For a time, it was as though the Great Crusade had returned, the unstoppable might of a prime arc shining in unstoppable arcs of gold. Blood Angels advanced behind him, fury tempered by their father's presence, their usual risk of the Black Rage seemingly diminished. Everywhere Sanguinius went, Imperial hearts blazed. The plague hordes faltered, their vile gifts from the plague god seeming to recede in the aura of the prime arc's presence. Many among the Blood Angels found themselves uncertain of their own eyes, so accustomed to legends of Sanguinius's heroic end. To witness him striding across the battlefield, unwavering in his defense of the Emperor's realm, made them wonder if they still dreamed. Yet the gore was real, the horror tangible, and so was their father's grace. Carried by that momentum, the Chaos Warband was pushed back world by world. Where the forces of Nurgle once spread contagion, the Blood Angels established strongholds of faith and resilience. Millions were inoculated by newly synthesized cures from the Mechanicum, who worked under Sanguinius's oversight. The Prime Arc had no illusions that the plague seeds could be fully eradicated in one campaign, but this victory was a resounding statement. The Imperium was not finished yet. Meanwhile, Guilliman personally led a secondary front in another segment of the war zone, coordinating fleet actions that struck at the supply lines of Chaos reinforcements. His strategic acumen proved invaluable, ensuring that Sanguinius's forces were never overwhelmed by hidden reserves. In times of respite, the two prime arcs communicated via secure hololink. Each time, a reverent hush would fall upon the Strategium decks, for all present recognized that these two living legends, once parted by the greatest betrayal in the galaxy's history, were united again. Their brotherhood seemed to transcend the gloom overshadowing the Imperium. In the aftermath of these successful campaigns, the Imperium roared with triumph. Propaganda soared to new heights, proclaiming the dawn of a new era in which the Emperor's sons returned to guide humanity. Recruitment soared as entire populations flocked to recruitment stations, inspired by stories of Sanguinius's bright wings and Guilliman's unwavering leadership. Chaplains preached that the Emperor's grace was at work again. For a moment, hope kindled in corners of the galaxy thought lost. Yet not everyone viewed this resurrection with benevolence. Within the dark realms of chaos, the ruinous powers churned in agitation. Word of Sanguinius's return ignited myriad plots among Tsencha's labyrinthine minions, while Khorne's legions raged for a chance to dethrone the Angel anew. Agents of the ruinous powers crept through shadows, sowing disbelief and paranoia. Certain sectors loyal to the Emperor's worship in a more puritanical sense questioned if Sanguinius's presence was a test, or a trick by the archenemy. Secret cults whispered that if a prime arc could be resurrected, perhaps other legendary figures, including traitors, were not beyond restoration. So the seeds of doubt were planted, even as the Imperium's general morale skyrocketed. For the Blood Angels, the greatest challenge lay in how Sanguinius's presence affected their genetic curses. Many librarians observed that the red thirst subsided in those who regularly fought at Sanguinius's side. The black rage, that final plunge into the mania of their father's last stand, grew less frequent. Veterans of the Death Company, so far gone into madness that they typically existed as living weapons, displayed momentary lucidity. Some even recognized Sanguinius on the battlefield and rallied to him in one final burst of glory. Scholars among the chapter dared to hope that the gene seed might be cleansed entirely with the Prime Arc's direct involvement. But centuries of heartbreak made them cautious. The Prime Arc himself offered only comfort, acknowledging that the curse was tied to his own tragic death. If indeed that moment never truly ended for him, perhaps his return could, in time, sever that dark cycle. Amid these shifting tides, the day came when both Prime Arcs stood together in a place none had dared imagine: the Throne World, Terra. The journey home was an odyssey of warp route negotiation and monumental escort fleets, for Terra was under perpetual lockdown. Yet the High Lords of Terra insisted. If Sanguinius had indeed returned, then he must be presented before the Golden Throne. Guilliman steeled himself for the labyrinthine politics that awaited. Sanguinius simply prepared himself to see his father again, even if it were only the silent remains of that once inexhaustible will. When they emerged from warp near the Sol system, every defense platform, every orbital bastion, every Grey Knight fortress station scanned them thoroughly. The combined might of the Imperial Navy bristled, prepared for any sign of betrayal. But there was none. Guilliman and Sanguinius led a small honor guard to the surface aboard a majestic warship, its hull adorned with a newly fashioned sigil, a combination of the Ultramarine Omega and the Blood Angel's chalice, signifying their brotherhood. The descent through Terra's atmosphere was accompanied by triumphal chants broadcast citywide. Multitudes of pilgrims and civilians flooded the streets, ignoring curfews in their desperation to catch even a glimpse of the returning angelic figure. Inside the Sanctum Imperialis, the Prime Arcs navigated monumental corridors lined with golden reliefs. Massive statues of the Emperor's sons towered overhead, and among them stood a grand likeness of the Angel himself, wings spread and sword raised. To see his own visage immortalized thus was jarring for Sanguinius, a reminder of the eons that had passed. Finally, they reached the Eternity Gate, guarded by the Adeptus Custodes. Each guardian stood immobile, clad in auramite plate. One by one, they lowered their guardian spears in solemn salute. Even the Custodes, created from the Emperor's genetic will, could not hide their awe at the sight of Sanguinius returned. At last, Sanguinius stood before the golden throne. The emperor's silent form, locked in stasis, towered above all else. The wave of psychic force emanating from that seat was overwhelming, an oceanic tide of power that battered the senses, though barely a fraction of what it had once been. Guilliman kneeled, head bowed in humility. Sanguinius did likewise, tears tracing his cheeks. Memories swirled. His father's face shining with paternal pride, the aura of unshakable resolve that once led countless armies. Now, the emperor's physical shell remained locked in place, the barest flicker of life sustained by machinery older than living memory. Sanguinius reached a trembling hand forward, stopping a few inches from the throne's surface. He whispered words that only Guilliman and the emperor, if he could hear, would know. "Father, I have returned, though I know not how. Forgive me for failing you, and grant me the strength to serve you once more." Those present swore that, in that moment, the golden throne's illumination intensified just a fraction. Perhaps it was a malfunction of ancient systems, or maybe the emperor offered a silent acknowledgement. To witness a prime arch return to his father's side after 10 millennia was an event that defied precedent. From that day forth, a new chapter began in the Imperium's troubled history. The angel had risen, the avenging sun stood beside him, and the emperor still watched over humanity from his silent vigil. The High Lords convened a special council to determine Sanguinius's formal position. Some advocated that he should rule as a co-regent alongside Guilliman, while others feared such a change could destabilize the delicate power balance. Sanguinius himself expressed no desire for formal office. He had never fought for power or politics. His only ambition was to protect humanity and uphold the emperor's dream of a brighter future. A dream now tarnished yet not wholly extinguished. Over time, it was decided that Sanguinius would embark on a joint crusade with Guilliman, forging one unstoppable tide of imperial might. The bureaucracy still needed Guilliman's day-to-day governance, but Sanguinius's presence, equal parts inspirational and terrifying to the Imperium's enemies, was a boon none could deny. And so it was that the two prime arcs ventured forth once more into the stars. Their fleets swelled with reinforcements from chapters across the galaxy. Even the aloof Blood Angel successor chapters, Flesh Tearers, Angels and Carmen, Angel Sanguine, and others answered the call, nearly overwhelmed by the prospect of fighting under their progenitor's direct command. The Indomitus Crusade's resources merged with a new wave of impetus, forming what some started to call the Angelic Indomitus. This combined armada was unstoppable, forging new warp corridors and cleansing entire subsectors of heretics and xenos. They struck out at hotspots of chaos, toppling warbands that had long evaded the Imperium's fleets. They answered pleas from besieged worlds, establishing enclaves of stability in the darkness. And everywhere they went, the rumor of the angel's presence banished despair. At times, they faced fearsome opposition. Tyrannid swarm splinters that devoured entire planets, Tau expansions wielding advanced technology, Drukhari raiders sweeping in from the webway to prey on the vulnerable. Yet the unstoppable synergy of Guilliman's grand strategic vision and Sanguinius's frontline leadership proved decisive more often than not. One prime arc was formidable enough. Two together were a legend reborn. Still, the horrors of the galaxy did not relent. Eldritch powers stirred in the far corners of the void. The traitor prime arcs, some active in the Eye of Terror, others rumored to slumber in demon worlds, took notice. Angren's roars of anger reverberated through the warp, magnified by Khorne's thirst for the ultimate duel. The Red Angel might challenge the Golden Angel once more. Magnus, the Crimson King, plotted from the planet of the sorcerers, considering how best to twist these new developments to Tsench's advantage. Rumors swirled that Morderan himself had begun preparing a grand campaign of pestilence to reclaim what Sanguinius had taken from Nurgle's domain. Lorgar's corrupted disciples zealously spread blasphemous prophecies, claiming that this resurrection would herald an even greater downfall. Thus, the threat of a counteroffensive from the traitor legions loomed ominously. Such knowledge weighed heavily on Guilliman and Sanguinius. They understood that their successes could provoke a cataclysmic response from the forces of chaos. Both prime arcs discussed the need to shore up defenses across the Imperium, fortifying critical worlds and ensuring that supply lines were unbreakable. They also recognized that certain secrets, such as the exact nature of Sanguinius's return, might best remain undisclosed, lest the power behind it be exploited or undone. Over the next several years, they forged their path across the Segmentum Solar, weaving around the roiling edges of the Great Rift, extending humanity's reach to planets once thought lost. Some watchers in the shadows believed that the Emperor's grand design was finally bearing fruit, that the reemergence of Sanguinius was an integral part of his final plan. Others, more cynically, speculated that Chaos had set a trap, that the Imperium had played into it by welcoming the Angel's return without fully discerning its cost. But no matter the underlying truth, the results were undeniable. Systems were liberated, Chaos footholds shattered, morale soared. Whenever possible, Sanguinius visited the Blood Angels and their successor chapters. The effect of his presence on the gene flaw was a matter of intense scrutiny. Apothecarians recorded some improvement, but not a complete cure. The red thirst still lingered, though lesser in intensity, and the black rage's occurrence diminished but never fully vanished. Some among the Blood Angels believed that as they spent more time with their father, the effect would grow, eventually scouring the flaw from their blood forever. Sanguinius, however, urged them to remain vigilant, for he too felt the echo of that final battle with Horus in his mind. Even angels bear scars. Just as it seemed their crusade approached an unstoppable momentum, the galaxy shifted once more. Massed warp storms opened near the edges of the Cadian Gate. Demonic fleets poured forth, led by none other than a mysterious being who claimed to be ascended from the essence of Horus. This War Master of Chaos unleashed a campaign that threatened to sever the newly strengthened lines of Imperial control. Guilliman and Sanguinius both sensed that they would soon face a pivotal confrontation, one that might test Sanguinius's resurgence against the shade of the foe who once ended his life. In response, the angelic Indomitus gathered its might, summoning allies from across the Imperium. Sisters of Battle marched side by side with the Blood Angels, chanting praise to the living saint among them. Skitarii legions from Mars deployed with newly sanctified war machines, eager to see the Prime Arc's effect on the battlefield. Varied chapter masters pledged their banners to Sanguinius and Guilliman alike. It was a congregation of imperial unity not seen since the Great Crusade. The stage was set for a confrontation that would either shatter the Imperium's greatest hope or cement it for centuries to come. As the combined fleets surged toward the war-torn front lines, Sanguinius gathered his sons. He spoke to them plainly. "I have returned not to claim glory, but because the Emperor's dream must live. We are the shield against the darkness. We are the keepers of the light. My brothers, the Imperium endures through our sacrifice. Stand with me, and no foe shall break us." Those words, carried by a voice that once rang across the battlefields of yore, ignited an inferno in every Astartes who heard them. Even stoic ultramarines felt their hearts swell, for this was the angel, the living symbol of mankind's noblest aspirations. Then came the day of battle. Vast chaos armadas encroached upon a cluster of fortress worlds, while cultists from within spread subversion. The planet's orbit glittered with weapons fire and starship debris. On the surface, disease, mutation, and apostasy had taken root in every city. Rifts opened, spewing demons into the battered defenders. The smell of brimstone and ozone hung thick in the air. If the traitor commander truly carried the essence of Horus, as the rumors suggested, then history threatened to repeat itself, an echo of the heresy that almost sundered the Imperium forever. Yet this time, Horus would not face Sanguinius alone. Guilliman stood firm, having marshaled the might of half a segmentum behind him. Sanguinius descended to the surface amid thunderous applause of Ceramite wings, his golden halo illuminating the gloom. Blood Angels soared on jump packs behind him, unleashing a precise fury upon the twisted heretics. Ultramarines advanced methodically, establishing perimeter strongholds and crushing chaos ambushes. Forces from a dozen other chapters contributed their specialized skills, from Raven Guard stealth tactics to Imperial Fist siege mastery. The synergy was unprecedented. The presence of the alleged Horus Reborn made itself known. In the heart of the largest hive city, a monstrous figure wearing Baroque power armor, crowned with warp flames, emerged. Identical in height and girth to the War Master of old, its face hidden behind a demonic mask. Loyalists recoiled at the wave of malevolence that rolled off him. The entity's legion of corrupted Marines, Night Lords, Word-bearers, and Black Legion renegades, charged with insane fervor. In the swirling madness of bolter fire and swords clashing, Sanguinius and Guilliman advanced. If it truly was Horus, or even an echo of him, then it must be confronted by the Emperor's living sons. That final confrontation was cataclysmic. The traitor champion unleashed warp-laden strikes that caused the very ground to crack open, spewing tongues of warp flame. Guilliman's sword clashed with unholy scythes, sparks raining in molten arcs. Meanwhile, Sanguinius engaged in a dance of fury and grace, his blade weaving through a vortex of demonic illusions. The roar of battle reached a deafening crescendo. Squads of Blood Angels and Ultramarines formed a protective ring, fending off lesser Chaos champions so that the Prime Arcs could engage the foe unimpeded. Just when it seemed the abomination might overpower them, Sanguinius's voice boomed across the warp itself, fueled by his boundless faith in the Emperor. Golden wings spread wide, blazing with ethereal brilliance. The illusions and warp manifestations peeled away under that radiance, revealing the traitor champion for what it was. A half-formed puppet of chaos, a sick mockery of Horus. In that moment, Guilliman struck with the Emperor's sword, slicing open the abomination's armor, exposing raw warp essence. With a cry that seemed to rattle the bones of reality, Sanguinius followed through, ramming his blade into its heart. The pseudo-Horus staggered, spitting curses that twisted the air, then collapsed in a surge of warp energy that evaporated in a thunderous implosion. As the warp storms receded, Sanguinius sank to his knees, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the deed and the echo of memory. The last time he had faced Horus, he had paid with his life. Now, with Guilliman at his side, he had shattered the twisted effigy of his murderer. Thunderous cheers erupted from the Loyalist lines, and across the sector, Chaos forces felt the backlash of their champion's demise. Many demons and cultists dissipated, fleeing like shadows banished by the sun. The fortress worlds endured, liberated once more by the Emperor's chosen sons. In the days that followed, the Imperium reeled with joy. The synergy of Guilliman's leadership and Sanguinius's inspirational presence had wrought a seemingly impossible victory. Pilgrims spread the story far and wide. The Angel and the Avenging Sun have restored the Emperor's light. Across the galaxy, new battle cries emerged. For the Emperor, for Sanguinius, for Guilliman. With each retelling, the legend grew, and despair was replaced by the faint glimmer of faith that the age of the Imperium might not be as doomed as many had feared. Yet Sanguinius, though comforted by this success, found his mind returning to the Golden Throne. That faint flicker of the Emperor's presence had left an indelible impression on him. He sensed that his father still struggled within that arcane machinery, fighting a war in the immaterial realm that none but the greatest psychers could fathom. Could the Emperor himself be restored in time, just as Sanguinius had been? The Prime Arc was no fool. He understood that the Emperor's predicament was far more complex. But the seed of a new possibility had been planted in his mind, and perhaps in Guilliman's as well. In the centuries to come, should the Imperium stand that long, this union of Sanguinius and Robot Guilliman would be recorded in the grand cathedrals of Terra, Baal, and Makridge alike. The scribes would call it the reforging of angels, the brotherhood of the two, or countless other eulogies. But for those who stood there in the moment, for those who witnessed the impossible made real, the meaning was simpler. Sanguinius had returned, and Robot Guilliman stood at his side. Father and brother fighting once more for the salvation of mankind, as it was always meant to be. And in that cosmic darkness, where the Imperium had teetered upon the brink, a new light, fragile yet glorious, shone forth, a testament that even the greatest tragedies could not forever silence the hope of humanity, so long as the Emperor's sons still drew breath.